You know you're really in the right place when you find yourself at a company whose values align so very much with yours. And that's where I found myself 18 years ago when I had the opportunity to join Worthington Industries. I'd already been fortunate enough to meet Mr. McConnell through some of my community work, and particularly around some of the sports activities. And particularly when I ultimately went to work for him for the 2000 NHL expansion franchise, which later became the Columbus Blue Jackets. So I knew of its excellent reputation and the way it treated people. And so when they asked me to join the company, I was really excited. It wasn't something in my grand scheme of things in terms of my career that I thought, one, I'd be working for a Fortune 1000 company, but also one that had such a tremendous reputation in the community. So I felt pretty honored to get that invitation. It's given me the opportunity to explore a lot of things, to stretch myself into some areas where I didn't think I'd necessarily explore my career. I'm grateful for that. But I've also been very excited about the opportunity to be involved in helping to continue to cultivate our tremendous culture that we are known for at Worthington. And I'm not here today to talk about leadership as an expert on leadership, but because really I've witnessed some great leadership at the company and want to expound on that a little bit today and really talk about how a value system can be put into place that really lifts up its people, recognizes its people, and gets the best out of them. We're now 6 decades into Worthington Industries, and I'm here to tell you that our philosophy is applied and really implemented in a way that gets the most out of people. It motivates people, and we continue to be successful on a lot of fronts. So I'd like to talk about our philosophy, how it came to be, and a little bit about the man behind it. With the help of the late Paul Oddie, Mr. McConnell's thoughts about leadership and our philosophy were captured in a book called Our Golden Rule. And it was printed in 2004 at Franklin University. It was part of President Oddie's vision for a leadership center. And last year at about this time, Paul had also published another book called We Leadership. Unfortunately and sadly, Paul passed away just prior to the printing of that book, which highlights our philosophy in modern day terms, but also reflected on his time with Mr. McConnell around Our Golden Rule book. I worked with Paul a little bit on our chapter in We Leadership, and I was pleased to be able to today be here to talk a little bit more about it. To understand how our philosophy came to be, I think we have to really step back and understand a little bit about the man, John Henderson McConnell. He grew up in a very rural, small West Virginia community called Pewtown. I think there were about 80 or 90 people in that community. You can't find it on a map today. It no longer exists, but it was pretty close to Weirton and Steele, so close to the Ohio border in West Virginia. He had a very modest upbringing. There was an outhouse in the back. His first job was shucking corn for pennies as a youngster. He played sports in high school and he got a job at Weirton and Steele. And he turned down a WVU athletic scholarship because going to work as a steel worker was really an expectation from his family and the community. And he did that, but when World War II broke out, he knew where he needed to be. And he worked on gunfire control in the Pacific Theater on the USS Saratoga. And after the war, like within days, when he made it home, he married his high school sweetheart, Peggy Reardon. And he went to Michigan State University on the GI Bill, and he played for the Spartans. He worked nights at an Oldsmobile plant, and he got a taste of union life, something that would stay with him as he would think about his own business years later. He was told not to run a machine too fast because it would raise the expectations of management. With his business degree, he went back to Weirton to sell, but after about 2 years, he thought, I think I could make a go of this. I think I could start my own business. I see a niche for the kind of work that I want to do in steel processing. And you may know the story from here. there is a replica of the 1952 Oldsmobile he used as collateral to borrow $600 to match the $1,200 he had in his bank account to buy his first load of steel, ironically, from Weirton. He's told the story that when he went to place that order, even though he had friends at Weirton because he'd worked there, they denied him credit because they said, you have to have cash. So he had to do what he had to do on the Olds. The Olds, or a replica of it, is sitting in our corporate office. Very proud of that, and it's a great way to sort of touch the past and remind us of our humble beginnings. It's also a great reminder of how important the automotive industry is to our company too. But it's great to have it, and it's a touch point in our lobby, and it's a fun thing for folks to see. But isn't that just a great American business story? I mean, here's a guy that grew up, went to school, was the first person in his family to go to college. He probably had a life that was going to end up being in a steel mill, because that's what they knew. Instead, he went to college, he served his country, and he came back and he thought he could do anything. The sky was the limit. And when folks ask him, well, what did you do that for? You risked everything. And he said, well, I didn't have anything to risk. I didn't have anything to lose. So why not? And really wanted to apply, his beliefs and his knowledge in a business. So that's a little bit about him, and we'll come back to him in a little bit. But I think in order to really appreciate the philosophy and how it lives today, you need to know a little bit about us. So if you'll indulge me in my hat as the investor relations officer of the company, I'd just like to walk you through a little bit about who we are today. Because when you think about a company that started with really $1,200, $1,800 in a loan to be able to buy his first load of steel, it's pretty impressive what the company is today. I'll walk this way. We've actually reached sales of over $3 billion. Last year was a little bit of a down year for us. We were just under $3 billion. But you can see that we are in several business lines. Steel processing is still very much our legacy business. We also acquired a pressure cylinders business back in the early 1970s. Some of you here may remember Lennox Industries. That was the company that Mr. McConnell purchased against the advice of his banker because it was losing money. But guess what? Like the steel business, it made money its first year under the umbrella of Worthington Industries. Of course it did. Several lines of businesses underneath the pressure cylinder segment. You are probably most familiar with us if you have a propane tank, at least I hope you are, on your gas grill. We make those. We make hand torches. We make something called the balloon time kit that you may see if you buy the helium tanks with balloons in the box. That's our product. Camping cylinders, the Coleman brand is under our umbrella. We're also into other areas which require the same kind of technology related to oil and gas equipment. So what comes out of the ground, what comes out of the wells, we are capturing with some of our equipment. Alternative fuels, CNG tanks in cars and trucks and fleets, we also make those. And we've just entered the cryogenics business with great opportunity ahead, I think, on that front. Everything from industrial applications to what we like to refer to as animal husbandry in terms of life sciences cryogenics. So more to come on that front, but pretty exciting frontier when you talk about sort of reinventing and reinvigorating a business. And the rest of the business lines go from a cabs business that helps make the cabs that folks sit in and those big earth movers that you may have seen, Caterpillar or John Deere. We also don't see them as much in this room, but well, the other actually is some ceiling grid tiles. They're very small ceiling grid tiles. We have a joint venture with a company called Armstrong, and it's called WAVE, and a number of other joint ventures that help serve both the construction and automotive industry. We have been on the New York Stock Exchange since 2000. We went public as a company in '68 under the NASDAQ. We have about 10,000 employees in 80 facilities in 11 countries. Did y'all know that? Because sometimes people see our little blue buildings on 270 and think that's all we do. Admit it. How many of you just thought that? Thank you. I appreciate that. Because I get that comment. Really? You're global? We really are. We primarily have non-union facilities, and as you're going to hear, we have that great culture around our philosophy that treats employees, customers, suppliers, and investors like we want to be treated. There's that global reach. I won't go into all of them, but you see a pretty heavy concentration in Ohio, which makes a lot of sense when you think about the automotive industry, just north of us. But we also have a number of cylinder plants within that scope. And we like this sort of snapshot of the things that we produce. 7 million tons of steel, probably pretty hard to imagine the magnitude of that, but I am here to tell you that that's a lot of steel. It rivals most of the automakers here in the US, the domestic ones. And then when you look at our cylinders business and the amount of cylinders that they produce, it's pretty staggering. 26 million cylinders that we produce across the globe, in addition to the 45 million Balloon Time, Coleman, Burns-O-Matic, and Worthington branded products. So it gets big numbers pretty quick. And then our ceiling grid business, which we talked about, 1 billion linear feet, which basically we could take that 8 times around the world. It's an amazing business, and it's been a joint venture. We've had a partnership with Armstrong now for 20 plus years. I mentioned earlier about steel and the automotive industry. We clearly have a great partnership with them. Much of our steel processing revenue comes from both the domestics and the new domestics. And you can kind of get a sense of where our steel shows up in your car. But there's a good chance, I think it's around 50% of the cars produced in this country have our steel in it. So stuff that I can't really tell you about in the transmission and the clutch plate area, but there it is. I know that for us, you hear a lot of talk about lightweighting and the CAFE standards. The good news for us is a big part of our business concentrates on those parts, and when the transmissions do raise up from the 6 to 8 to 10 speeds, that's good news for us. So that's a little bit of a quick snapshot of who we are as a company. So when Mr. McConnell started the company and he was thinking about, and I'm sure he didn't do this right away. Well, I know he didn't do this right away. He was too busy out selling, and then he would come back, put his overalls on, and help produce the order. But at some point, probably in the mid-'60s, he started thinking about what's making us so great? What is it about us that we're doing that's working? And so this was sort of his initial outline, his first sort of crack at what he thought made us tick. I think that's kind of cool. People-oriented was obviously first on his list, but also profits. He was not afraid to talk about profits are important. If you don't have the profits, you can't do all the great things that you want to be able to do. And management style. So really the early beginnings of putting pen to paper for our philosophy. And he used this card. I think he laminated it and had it in his jacket pocket for like 30 years. It was his sort of guide for his speeches that he would make, which kind of cracked me up that that's what he used. But he did. I've reread our Golden Rule book, which we have and use, but I chuckled about how modest he was about speaking. I was struck by the notion that he thought he didn't really say anything that was quotable, in his words. And his point was that employees might not remember what he had to say or something that he would say, but they would remember how he made them feel by recognizing them and valuing them. Pretty powerful. Well, when I think about the quotable part, though, I have to laugh a little bit, because while he wasn't an orator with soaring words, he was quotable. And I think it's because he listened well and he was thoughtful. He was kind of a man of few words, but when he said something, people leaned in, and they leaned in before leaning in was in our nomenclature. Here's one of my favorite quotes, and we talk about it a lot in communications, in our communications group. Tom Peters, who's a well-known business writer, liked to interview Mr. McConnell and talk about our company, which was really a great thing. But he was particularly interested around the time that we were first named on the list of Fortune companies in terms of the top places to work for in the country. And he told this story well, and I think we have it on videotape. But he said, "Mr. McConnell, what is it that you do? What's so special about Worthington? How do you do what you do? What's your secret?" Mr. McConnell sat there and he was getting ready to speak, and Tom leaned in, and Mr. McConnell said, "Well, Tom," he's ready to write it down. Mr. McConnell says, "We do something different around here. We talk to people." That was it. I love that. We talk to each other, is really his line. And I think that, as it becomes an even more important part of our philosophy when we talk about communications, he's right. And I think it's particularly applicable today. When you think about the amount of texting we do, the amount of emailing we do, just walk down the hall and talk to the person. You're in this long email exchange, and we kind of forget that sometimes. Not what he intended at the time, but certainly quotable for today. I think it's just kind of ironic. I like this quote, and you're going to hear from him a little bit later. I actually have a videotape. He took the laminated card, and he said he flushed out our philosophy in about an hour. And I'm going to give you a copy of the philosophy card here in a minute. But think about it. Here's this startup manufacturer rewriting the handbook really on how to operate a company. He was a guy influenced by his experiences in the Navy, in the Olds plant, in his little town in West Virginia, making the golden rule the foundation of the philosophy in 1966. He was a trailblazer. A lot of people have used that since. I hear it on the radio sometimes by all kinds of companies. But tough guy saying, "Yeah, it's a tough business. We're steel guys, but we're going to treat people right. We're going to treat people the way we all want to be treated." In the eyes of many, he was foolish to even talk about sharing profits with his employees. People predicted he would fail. I think he kind of liked that challenge. But he wasn't worried. He strongly believed in recognition for employees and leading them. He expected managers and supervisors to manage people by engaging with them, talking to them. He wanted employees to know they were valued, plain and simple. And that's why things like a barbershop in every plant, workout facilities, coffee breaks. Well, he didn't do coffee breaks. He did free coffee. Because coffee breaks, he thought those were kind of crazy things to institute. If you want a cup of coffee, don't shut down the line, but go ahead and get it when you need one. His pride and joy was the medical center that he was able to get done in the early 90s. And it's here in Columbus. 3 full-time doctors, nurses. It's really where our largest concentration of employees and families are. And it was another way to recognize and value the employee. And those doctors and those nurses go to our facilities to also do health fairs and screenings. And then we have a pharmacy as part of the medical center, so we can do mail-in prescriptions for everybody in the U.S. in all of our locations. He was very, very proud of it. Not only was it a way to recognize and value folks, but it was also a way for us to try to control costs. I thought you might appreciate hearing Mr. McConnell talk a little bit about his thoughts in his own words around the philosophy. And this is an interview that was done around our golden rule.
Dr. Oddie, president of Franklin University, wrote the prologue to your book, and in there he said that your philosophy is entrenched in your action and in your words.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So that tells people that what they see is what they get with you. and that your consistency really is unheard of in today's way of measuring leadership. How are you able to remain so steadfast in your convictions?
That's just the way I was born and raised, and I truly love people. I think I like to interact with people, and that's been probably the secret to any success I've had, people.
I have in my hand a card I'm sure you would recognize.
Yeah.
And the first time I heard the story, it says our philosophy on it, and it talks about the way that you feel about the company. And for one thing it says in here is the word our golden rule, which is the name of
The name of the book, yes.
But tell me about this card and how it started and what it means today.
This is over 30 years ago. I don't remember the exact date, but I sat down one day. I said, what makes us so great a company? Because we were really growing and making great profit. And so I sat down with a legal pad and wrote out longhand. First thing I said, we have to make profit for our shareholders. That's number one. Mm-hmm. And then from then on, it was people are our most important asset. And everything from then on was based on on people. And I always said, if you want to do good, make profit first. Then you can do all the good you want for charities or whatever. But you got to make profit first.
So it's not a dirty word.
No, it certainly isn't. But I sent that down to our chief financial guy, and I said, edit this for grammatical errors and all that. And he didn't make any changes. So we typed it up, and that's what came out of it.
It was before he had a communications department. He sent it down to the CFO. I had the pleasure of interviewing Mr. McConnell several times before he passed in 2008, and he could be a tough interview because he was a man of few words. But he always gave me a nugget of something that was certainly worthwhile. Would you all pass those behind you too? Thank you. And I wished I could have done a few more. I mean, I would have loved the opportunity, especially after watching this one, which was probably one of the last interviews that he did. So the philosophy, it's 371 words. And Mr. McConnell was really proud that only a word had changed, a word or two had changed, and I know one of them was gender related. And as you can see, it really does touch all the things we need to run the company and create a culture that really enables success. And I won't read it because you all can read it, but you can see the categories that are important and the call-outs. I mean, he talked about earnings, and I think particularly the consistent growth earnings speaks to us and has certainly spoken to us in the last 10 years. We've really been focused on that. So I'll talk a little bit about our golden rule, people, what he says around people. You read this and you really get a sense of where he was coming from. We don't have it in here, but one of the things and the ways that we recognize people and recognize the efforts of employees is the way we do profit sharing. And Mr. McConnell was very clear that that was recognition. Our present day chairman and CEO has said, if we find a better way, we'll change it. Profit sharing is not in the philosophy. We haven't found one yet. It continues to be a huge staple of who we are as a company. Safety is not in here, but safety is very much a part of who we are. We want everybody to be able to come to work and go home the way they walked in the door. So safety is a part of every shift, every discussion, and we even talk about it at corporate. Customers, such a simple line, but so meaningful. Without them, we have nothing. So true. Without our suppliers, we don't have the products we need to be able to produce what our customers need. On an organization front, I remember when I got there 18 years ago, I asked to see an organization chart. There really wasn't one. He might cringe a little today because we actually do have some cropping up here and there. Don't tell him. But he also didn't really understand why we needed an IT department either. So that was a whole nother story. We really like communication being highlighted on the philosophy. It's good to have your department name on there. And one of my favorites is citizenship. And I think that really speaks to who we are as a company. In all of the communities where we have our plants and we have our families and our employees, we want to make sure that we are also good citizens of those communities, and probably a little bit bigger here because it is our corporate office. Notice that the card also says our philosophy. It's not the philosophy. It's not Worthington's philosophy. It's not words of wisdom from the CEO. It was really important to him, and it is clearly important to us today, that this not feel like a top-down, cram it down their throats, they'll get it. No, this is something that we all own, and it's up to us to use it and make it work. And that's an ongoing conversation, keeping it alive, talking about it, lifting it up. I mean, how do you keep it fresh? How do you make sure that it works in the boardroom, in the office, and on the plant floor? And we can really never take it for granted. So it's an ongoing dialogue. And I can tell you that in the senior management meetings, the philosophy is in the room with us. It gets us through the good times and the bad times. And it really becomes our North Star when it comes to decision making. John P. McConnell took over the company in the late 90s as chairman. Had been named CEO in the earlier 90s. And he's only our second chair in the history of the company, which is pretty amazing to think about. He grew up with the philosophy, he believes in its power, and he really does hold the management team to account. And every year or two, he takes the senior leadership team away, and they go through the philosophy word by word, line by line, to make sure that we are continuing to use it in the right way, interpret it correctly, and making sure that folks understand it. Because it's really not any good for any of us if everybody in the boardroom understands it, but nobody else does. It won't work that way. So we have to continue to be vigilant in making sure that it continues to live and work for us. I think it remains an incredible recruitment tool for us as well. I think it helps us stand out as a company. And I don't have to tell any of you in the room that workforce is a critical issue for all companies. I get a kick out of hearing stories of people maybe looking on the website and they come in for an interview and they say, is it for real? Is that something that's just nice and you have it on your website, or is this something that really works for the company? I mentioned that John P. has grown up with our philosophy, but I also think he found a way to energize it and unleash its power right before the Great Recession in 2008 in a new way. He set us on a journey of change. And he was fond of saying, maybe not fond, but he said it a lot, that success is a mighty enemy. And we perhaps had gotten a little complacent. We had some good top line growth, but we were not seeing it on the bottom line, particularly in our legacy steel business. And so he put out the challenge that we needed to change. What's the Einstein quote? We use that a lot. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That was a pretty common theme in our kickoff meetings. And it's not that we were losing money and that things were deteriorating. It was just we were just sort of status quo, kind of fat and happy. I think if not for our culture that's so people-centered and has profit sharing as the core of recognition, I'm not sure we would have been successful. As a matter of fact, I think we could have been part of the 70% of companies who fail at this kind of transformational effort. But what happened was pretty amazing. Ideas came from the floor. There were teams of people spending time on projects they never had the time to do, never were really given the leeway to do. They were lifting up ideas. They were making change. And not only were they making change, the change stuck. And in the steel business today, it's the way they operate. There's a transformation playbook that goes deep. It's data-driven, which doesn't sound people-centered, but it is. You have to have the data to understand where your problems are or where you're making progress. That's what that means. And today we've launched the next round of transformation because we believe there's more to do. And we also want the other businesses to also get a good impact from that effort. And so we've launched what we call Transformation 2.0. And we're using a familiar line in the company from our founder, that guy that wasn't quotable. He thought maybe when he said we've only scratched the surface in the 70s, that might be something that would rally the troops to believe that what they had done since 1955 was pretty amazing, but there was more to do. And that's kind of where we are today. We've made some good change, we've made some good progress, but there's still much to do. And I think there is a feeling in the company that our best days and better days are in front of us. That's pretty exciting after 62 years. I like this quote from Mr. McConnell, and he talked about being a people person, and he was. He was really proud of that book. It's probably not something he sat around and thought about writing a book about the philosophy, but I know that at the end of the day, he was proud of getting to do it, and we use it in our training and development. He loved talking about how the company began and became successful, talking about lessons learned and mistakes made, and yes, you need to make mistakes. I'd encourage you to read it if you haven't. There's a chapter in there called Gray is Good. It's a favorite of mine because it's not all black and white, and he certainly recognized that. I think he was most proud of the people he employed and all of the relationships he made along the way, as that quote can attest. He enjoyed the people aspect so much, and we're lucky that was his calling card. And a people-centered philosophy came out of that. And John P's quote, Chairman and CEO, that CEO kind of went flying over there. And he's clear about this. This is, we think it's Worthington, and because of who we are, it is special. But it's certainly a set of beliefs and a set of values that can be replicated elsewhere in other businesses and organizations. I think that surprises people sometimes. But we've done it, and we've done it effectively in companies that we've acquired, in other countries, in other cultures. It takes work. It takes a commitment, it takes a focus to deploy it and keep it going, but it can be done. Here are my just final thoughts and sort of a personal philosophy story that I'd like to share. And this happened early on in my career. We'd had a pretty devastating fire in 1997 at our Monroe, Ohio facility. There'd been a sealant product put on that building that was supposed to be non-flammable. Well, guess what? It wasn't. That fire hit hard and hit fast, and we're lucky no one was hurt. Everybody escaped. But the plant was destroyed. And so there were 300 people there without a place to work. And the management team in Columbus determined that we should rebuild the plant and that every single employee should be kept on. So some of them stayed there as the plant was being rebuilt, and many of them were deployed to other nearby facilities. Some came up to Columbus, some I think went down to Louisville, Kentucky, up into Delta, Ohio. A couple years later, I was with the company, and it was around the time that Fortune had named us, again, one of the top 100 companies to work for. And one of the reasons they did was because of the company's actions around that fire and the employment of folks and keeping them on the payroll. So we thought, well, why don't we go down and do a video? It'd be nice to sort of capture that spirit and give shareholders a sense of the new facility that we've built. And so I went down, and I'll never forget one of the interviews. A young man, probably in his late 20s, and just kind of went up to talk to him about his job and what he was doing on the line. And I said, so what did you think? You know, you've made it through this fire and you're still working here. And he said, I can't believe what the company did. He said, I'm just amazed. I thought I was out of a job. I wasn't sure how I was going to be able to feed my family or take care of my family. And he said, and I know it all came back to the philosophy and how this company treats people. And then the hair kind of stood up on the back of my neck because he pulled the card out and he held it up and he said, "Did you finish it for me?" It's made me a better person, a better husband, and a better father. I was like, wow, that's power. Sorry about that. It was either going to be a John McConnell story or that story. I don't know what I was going to say after that, but I'm sure it wasn't going to be as powerful. But I just, I will conclude after embarrassing myself, but it's pretty special place. And it's funny to think about a manufacturing company with this incredible industrialist in the name of John H. McConnell starting it around the Golden Rule and making it the success it is today. Thanks. Don't ask me questions about that story. All right, I'll take any questions, but nothing about that.
I'm actually over here too. Mr. Mack and Paul are proud today. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome. I'm over there emotional as well. One of the stories that I heard from Paul, and he and Mr. Mack were
Yeah,
good buddies.
yeah.
Good buddies.
They were.
And one of my most treasured possessions is a signed copy of that book, The Golden Rule. So it is definitely.
Yeah, it's a good read.
But one of the stories that Paul tells, or told of Mr. Mack was, he kept asking him during this book, you go into these steel companies, you acquire these companies, and they are, profit, there's not a lot of profit.
Yeah.
What do you do to make them successful? What is it? And, he started talking about, well, the people and this, and he goes, no, when you walk into that company, and you take it over, what is the first thing you do? And Mr. Mack thought about it, he goes, I fix the restrooms. He goes, have you ever been in a steel company? Those restrooms aren't fit.
It's true.
You treat people, like you want them to be treated. You fix the restrooms. That's the first thing I do when I go into a company, is to make sure that those are there. I don't know if you noticed the free haircuts too. You still have a barber on staff. Incredible in a company.
Sometimes he didn't buy the companies when he saw their restrooms.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sometimes he bought them and fixed them up, but sometimes he'd say, "Really?"
Really?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just that simple. So I think you're better now. We'll
I'm
take
better.
some questions.
I don't know that I'm better now, but sorry about that. I try not to do that. I've done it a few times though. Sonia will say, "Why'd you tell that story?" later. Yes.
Just a quick note that I noticed that I'm a real library person. The first library in this country is in Pennsylvania. Brad went to it.
Okay.
And Andrew Carnegie, the same kind of values.
Yes.
But what he did was, for the steel mill, which is known for that, he built a swimming pool in the library.
Ah.
So after work, the men could come in and clean up for them and their families,
Ah.
maybe take a full time or something like that.
Nice.
And, secondly, who, is there anybody that, beside his parents, that you thought that he felt very, very, very highly because of their values as well, or their leadership abilities?
Yeah, I mean, he had business people in his life. I mean, he admired Ray Kroc. I mean, he loved KISS, keep it simple, stupid. He would quote that quite often. His son could probably be better at this. I know his grandparents were important. So, I mean, family really meant a lot to him. it was a small, very small community. He also had an enduring friendship that I so admired, a man that I think they met when they were maybe 8 or 9 years old. They were friends for life, and I mean good friends. They served in the war together. I mean, not necessarily together, but they were in the war together. And I just had this sort of magical, and I mean, I actually got to meet and know the guy. I mean, that's just impressive to me, and I think that says a lot about the value he placed on relationships and people. I know Lincoln Electric was another company he admired in the way they treated people. I'll tell you where he really, I think, got a lot of his sort of early thoughts around how to treat people. His father worked at Weirton Steel, and Weirton Steel treated everybody like family. He remembered the picnics, he remembered the banquets, and that mattered to him. So I think that was another sort of, in his head when I get to run a company someday, I'd like to be able to do that as well. I think Lori, in the book, got him to talk about that a little bit. He said, it was great to have a dad that worked at Weirton Steel because we got to do a lot of fun things. So pretty cool. Yeah.
I teach management here, and once a term I take my students to either the cylinder plant or the steel plant. And for 95% of them, this is their first time ever walking into a plant. And when we come back, the following class, they talk about the warm relationship that exists between the management and the workers.
Yes.
The smiles they get, the way they get, and that just blows them away to see in a very repetitive, hot, humid, somewhat dirty and very loud environment.
Yes.
These people work so hard and they welcome you with open arms. And I credit that to the culture that this company was built upon.
Yeah.
And by the way, you have hired some of our best and brightest business students. So they
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I couldn't agree more, and I think our customers notice that, our investors notice that, so I mean, I appreciate you saying that. I just think there's a long list of reasons why. I didn't talk about the open door policy, I didn't talk about our employee councils, but there's just an atmosphere there. We're all in this together. There's not a, us and them. It is, and that's what was so wonderful about the transformation as well. I mean, it was, manager, supervisor, everybody, right next to each other trying to figure out better solutions and better ways. But I appreciate that. Thank you. Yes?
Cathy, on that note, with training, can
Yes.
you talk a little bit about steel salespeople's training, what they do for the first 6 months or so?
Sure, yeah. When someone is hired on, former sales guy here, when at Worthington Steel, part of their introduction to the company is spending time in the plants. And they actually are on the lines. They're wearing steel-toed boots, and it's the best way to learn about our products, about how it's done. How better to be able to go out in the field and talk about it. And it's there's science behind this. This isn't just, buying a coil of steel and cutting it and sending it out the door. I mean, we are, changing the chemical makeup of steel. We're doing something to it that's going to prepare it for an end product. That's changing the property of steel perhaps, or it's putting a coating on it. There are a number of processes. So the best way to learn that, and it's been for decades in Worthington, you spend a good probably 3 to 6 months on the floor understanding how it all works. It's a pretty cool part of the entry into the company. Thank you. Yes?
I noticed on the philosophy it stated no committees, and you mentioned employee councils. Can you talk a little bit about the difference and how you use employee councils?
And Mr. McConnell started the employee councils really as a way to make sure, the voice of employees are definitely heard by management, and there's an opportunity to be able to once a month. It's not just a list of grievances, but it's also to talk about what's working well and what might we do and when the banquet should be and why don't we do a picnic, Why can't the vending machines, have whatever? I mean, that's what those are for. And it used to be, and he talks about this, when he first started it, he was worried that there might be a bit of, nervousness about, well, I don't really want to be on that because I don't want people to think I'm, a mouthpiece for management. And that was not the case. And I think once they were on it, they realized that, good comes from it. It's a good opportunity to be able to talk about things that are going on the floor. I mean, so much so that years later, our corporate office has also started an employee council. We've got 3 floors of sort of disparate, doing different functions for the company and don't necessarily have the opportunity to come together to talk about things. And so we started one within the corporate offices for the very same reason, to be able to discuss anything. And there's usually somebody in there from management to either be able to address the issues on the spot, or we make a commitment to find out the answer. And then there are minutes, and the minutes are posted so everybody can read, what was discussed and the outcome. So it's been a rich and important tool, I think, again, for the culture of the company. And the open door policy, if I could just talk about that, was also something that Mr. McConnell was really passionate about. I mean, titles and, that's why the org chart was a no-no for him. That stuff doesn't really matter. If you want to talk about something and you feel like you've talked to your supervisor about it and you didn't really get where you wanted to go, you could take it all the way up to the CEO of the company without repercussions. He cites a couple, I think, in the Golden Rule where there were actually people that did do it and good came from it. It was maybe something that no one had thought about. Well, I didn't realize the implication of that. So he always enjoyed that opportunity to talk one-on-one with an employee. And I don't think hundreds of people came to see him, but there probably were, over the years, a couple dozen that came in to talk to him about an issue. And oftentimes the supervisor would be in the room, or Mr. McConnell might do a one-on-one. But it still exists today, and it's again still an important part of who we are. Yes.
Other than the obvious success and profits and stuff, can you show some other examples of how treating your employees good with respect, the picnics and everything, how they in turn have paid the company back for something like that?
Well, I think it shows up in what we do every day. And I mean, I think it's when you do something like the transformation. So basically, we brought in an outside consultancy, which was not something we would probably have ever done. But in order to move the needle, because who knows better about steel and about the company than us, right? I mean, that's human nature. We don't want someone from the outside coming in and telling us, but we needed that. And we needed to think of new ways and new processes to do things. I don't think you can do that unless you do have a culture where people feel like their voice, is valued or will be heard. I don't think you can implement change like that unless people feel like they have a voice at the table. So while I may not be able to cite a specific from a picnic to here, I do think that just in the overall makeup of the company, whether it's, hey guys, we're going to have to work overtime tonight because this customer order, we promised them it was going to be there the next morning, and they do it. I mean, we could probably cite some Olympic-size efforts on that front where it's just no question. Well, this customer needs this. We promised this to the customer. We're going to get it done. And I would say the same thing would happen at corporate too. If we've got to get something done, it's the same thing. I mean, deadlines are deadlines, and you've got to rally and pull it together. You're probably not going to do that if you don't feel valued, if you don't feel like it matters in the end. So I just think one of the things I didn't say about the philosophy that's very important, and we talk about this all the time, you can't take one line out of the philosophy and say, well, this is the philosophy. It all works together. So in the same vein, I think it all works together. I mean, you have to create the culture, you have to stay after, make sure that culture still exists. How can we enhance it? How can we make sure that people understand it? And the benefit from that then is you get the best out of people. And that's really what Mr. McConnell wanted at the end of the day. I want the best out of you. And I want you to challenge me, and I want to be able to give you my best. but it's people to people. It's not, I'm the CEO and you're this person. He didn't view it that way. We're all in this together and on the same plane. At the end of the day, we're all Worthington Industries. Sure. Yes. Yeah.
No, today, a lot of times, especially with the young people going into jobs after they graduate, there's turnover just because.
Sure.
In today's world, millennials might have 7 to 10 jobs.
That's right.
Sort of the way it is.
It is.
So if they're coming into a company like Worthington Industries, which I know somebody who's there is very heavy millennial, do you guys have to change up anything as far as the philosophy, because it's a great philosophy, it's conservative in a way, but it should be okay for everybody. Did you do anything special in order, or do you do something specific so this turnover, which is typical of this generation, will not happen? It's not because they're not good people, it's just, hey, I see something better, I'm gonna move, I'm not scared to do those kinds of things. But do you guys feel like once people are in, especially the recent grads, that you're seeing that they are sticking around?
Yeah, I think we're like every company. We're trying to figure that out. But the values shouldn't have to change. The belief system is the belief system. And so we shouldn't have to change. And that was one of Mr. McConnell's big things. It's not the management style of the month. This is what we believe. And so it should be at the core of all that we do. How do we attract, the new talent? So we're doing things that all companies are doing. Our corporate headquarters has been totally kind of turned upside down. It's all very open. We have an expanded workout facility. We have a cafe that's, not rivaling Google by any means, but it's a nice place to be able to go and have meetings and eat. But there's also an outside area that's lovely. We kind of had those things in mind, that people are looking for sort of those creature comforts, those kind of extras beyond feeling valued in their work. Are we having trouble getting people to come into a job and want to move around to some of our locations? Yeah. We're not, maybe aren't getting as many people wanting to jump at that like it used to be. When you were with us, how many places were you for?
4, and the saying was, if you don't take this promotion, don't worry about the next.
Yeah, so I think you have to adjust, but the philosophy does not change. I think it's more about things that you implement and how you think about things. So we're doing training programs, we are cross-training people, to your point, having different roles and having the ability to do different roles is really important. So we have to think differently about how we train and deploy people. But again, the bedrock should not change. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about just the geographic differences in normal human culture? How do you take that culture that, it's one thing to say we have a strong culture in our corporate headquarters or even in our corporate region.
Sure.
But to be an international company, can you talk a little bit about how that culture comes alive around the globe?
Yeah, it can be a challenge, and we have to be able to have strong people go into those facilities. We can't just hand them the card and say, we'll see you in 6 months and hope it works. Worthington has to step up and be able to have people in those facilities to be able to talk about the philosophy and to get people to believe it. Sometimes we find in cultures, they don't believe it. That can't be true, it can't be possible. So it's something you have to be consistent about, you have to continue to talk about and work on. I know we've had our Austria facility for a long time, but that's a beautiful story about how the philosophy there blossoms, and they are one of the top companies by Fortune in Austria, year after year after year, and cite our philosophy as the core. Are there challenges in other locations around the philosophy? Sure, but you just have to keep working at it. I think every company we acquire, there's a learning curve in terms of the philosophy. Some of our best stories are about facilities that we may have acquired that were union. And in a relatively short amount of time, the employees there decide to take a vote and no longer be a union. So, those are the success stories of the philosophy. but it takes time and it takes a real diligent effort. I mean, you just can't hope that it works. There has to be some great learnings, there have to be great leaders deployed into those facilities to be able to, in some ways, convince the employee base that this is the way we operate. And you have to be attentive to the culture, absolutely, because every place is different. Even different parts of the country, we found as well.